And I'm very happy to welcome Claire Colliard, the director of the Center for Humanitarian Psychology.
Our organization, as you know, is called Center for Humanitarian Psychology. It was created 10 years ago and is still up and running. The expression of humanitarian psychology, which at the time I think I coined, was a decision to part from the model at the time, which was almost exclusively based on, you would say, humanitarian psychiatry, which was a mental health approach, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Humanitarian psychology has to do with two types of populations. One has to do with the kind of psychological support you can give to so-called beneficiaries of psychosocial programs after in emergency operations. That means operations after in the midst of conflict or after conflict and after natural disasters. And humanitarian psychology also has a department or a part that has to do with taking care or caring for humanitarian staff. You've heard many interventions, presentations yesterday, who showed you that it was something that was very much needed in all programs in the field to care for humanitarian staff. They have to put up with sometimes very dire conditions that we'll go through right now. And so humanitarian psychology tries to use the tools that we have in psychology, clinical psychology, meaning traumatology. We've heard a lot about PTSD yesterday, for instance. This is part of humanitarian psychology and psychiatry. You have also, so you have trauma, which is the basis of the intervention we have to deal with. Humanitarian psychology also has to do with extending those tools, the tools of psychology, clinical psychology, but also emergency psychology, and the new science called disaster psychology, to not only beneficiaries but also humanitarian staff. Today I've chosen to change a little bit the title and focus my intervention on the support that NGOs and NGOs can give to their field staff. It's a very specialized area, and most interventions to this morning will touch upon this subject. I'll go through the field in a very general way, so you have a basis upon which my colleagues will go a little further on a number of those issues that I'll just touch upon. Let me start with the example of our center as to illustrate the evolution of the field since 15 years ago. I personally started with the International Federation of Red Cross, who had called upon me and another colleague to create a psychological first aid unit for their field personnel. At the time, it was really very new. It was pioneer work. Parallel to what we did, ICRC also started creating what is called this, they called, at least at the time, the cell, the stress cell. The idea being that somebody who would be hopefully a psychologist would follow people from the pre-deployment to the coming back from mission with a briefing, debriefing, and perhaps support in the field while in the mission of all the expatriates. Actually, so as you can see, the Red Cross movement in the 90s were about the first one in the world to really start off this kind or have this kind of concern. After a few years working with the Federation, with friends, we decided to create the Center for Humanitarian Psychology, which is now a Swiss private foundation. We started off with a clinical approach, which was very much in favor at the time. 15 years ago, that was when the Rwandan genocide mobilized many NGOs in Zaire. At the time it was called Zaire, Congo now. People were talking a lot about PTSD, trauma. I mean, it was very bloody. Actually, of course, the operations were in very difficult zones, risky zones. So, of course, the thing that was coming out as obvious was, all these expatriates, they're traumatized, and so the approach, of course, was logically more clinical than anyone else. Very slowly over the years, it came to be understood that staff, just like any traumatized population actually, have a very small percentage of real diagnosed PTSD. Some have said 2%, others have said 5%. Of course, these percentages depend on the country where they are sent to, the type of incident that they experienced, and all other kinds of factors that influence the degree of trauma. But what about the others? What about the, let's say, 95% of the expatriates who do fairly well, except that, as we'll see later, they might have other kinds of difficulties.